Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me as always is my producer, Kevin Black. And also joining me tonight, we're keeping the NBA Lottery Prospect Fit series going. So before the NBA year starts, I want to talk about enough of these top draft picks, and I want to talk about their fits with their new teams, what they can expect to bring to the table, and also break down these young teams a little bit, right? Talk about their young core going forward, how these guys exactly fit, and what we can expect from the Houston Rockets going forward. So Rockets are the topic tonight. We did the Orlando Magic the other night. If you didn't listen to that episode of the podcast, please go check it out on the feed. But with me here, listen, if you listen to the Locked On Network, you've definitely come across Locked On Rockets. And if you're a Houston Rockets fan, I can assure you, you've listened to this man on plenty of other platforms. He's done a lot of work in the Houston Rockets space. Credentialed media member, was out at Summer League. We were just talking, we didn't get to connect this year, but hopefully next year. Jackson Gatlin. Jackson, what's going on, brother?
Nathan, I am so excited to be here, man. So excited to talk a little Houston Rockets with you. I mean, this is a really fun, exciting young team that just added another chunk of amazing talent this past year in the draft. And look, you know, we were joking about it before we hit the record button. This team might not do a whole lot of winning this next season, but they're going to be fun. You're going to get to see flashes of, you know, potential future stardom from guys like Jalen Green, maybe Kevin Porter Jr., you know, the other young guys that they're bringing in. But I'm ready to break it all down with you here, man.
Oh, yeah, we are definitely going to talk about a variety of players on this podcast. But obviously, as I said at the top, we got to start with the number 3 pick in the draft, Jabari Smith Jr., who ended up going to the Rockets. Wasn't projected that way for a lot of the pre-draft cycle, right? He was the odds-on favorite by Vegas to go number 1 to the Magic, and they clearly went a different direction. And we kind of thought all along, if that's the domino that was going to fall at number 1, Chet Holmgren would go number 2. And everybody thought Paolo was going to end up going number 3 to the Rockets. But it's funny how things work, right? You never quite always know what's going to happen on draft night. I love the surprise, especially as I'm watching live. So Jackson, your immediate reaction when the Rockets took Jabari Smith at number 3 was what?
Well, my immediate reaction was like, because we have to kind of rewind it right to the first pick just a little bit, right? Was just like the reaction was, oh, wow, the Paolo to the Magic thing is real, right? Because we saw the Vegas numbers start to kind of shift in that brief lead up to the draft where suddenly like the winds of change were blowing really, really strongly. Yep. And suddenly it looked like a very legitimate possibility, Paolo to the Magic at number 1. The pick comes in, Adam Silver announces it, then it's like, oh, okay. And there's that sudden like, oh, wow, Paolo's gone. Then there's the moment of what does OKC do at number 2? The moment Chet Holmgren's name was dropped, I immediately was elated. I was over the moon because that meant Jabari Smith Jr. would be a Houston Rocket. Nathan, I had him number 1 on my board throughout the entire pre-draft process. And I actually was, throughout the whole pre-draft process, I was lowest on Paolo Banchero. I had him 4th for most of the pre-draft process, and then as we got closer to the draft, I realized I wasn't giving him the same rope that I think I was giving like Jaden Ivey for some of his defensive struggles. So I started kind of easing up there, and by the time the draft got here, I had like Ivey and Paolo on the same tier, locked in at 3rd, but I had Jabari number 1, Chet number 2, so I was over the moon. I was excited, and like you said, right, we can't. Right, it's not over till the fat lady sings, or in this case, it's not over till the bald man announces the pick. And as soon as it was official that Jabari Smith Jr. would be a Houston Rocket, I was just envisioning all these different scenarios, how he would fit with the team, and things that we're going to, I'm sure, discuss in today's podcast.
Absolutely, and things that Jackson has been discussing, by the way, on the Locked On Rockets feed. If you don't listen to his podcast, definitely make sure you go throw him a subscription, because him and everybody else at the Locked On Network does a great job. But So you had Jabari Smith number 1 overall on your board. I could listen about any of these guys we're talking about tonight. I could sit here, I could give the audience a scouting report on any of these guys, but it's the Draft Deeper podcast. They've been hearing about me talk about these players for so long. And one of the things I love doing on a podcast feed, why I love to have guests on, is I want different perspectives. I want to hear what other people think about players, because as you go back and forth about guys and you have discussions, that's really where you evolve as a scout, as an evaluator, and that's how you grow a deeper appreciation of the game. So I want to hear some of your thoughts on these players, but let's start with Jabari Smith. So you had him number 1 overall. What's kind of your quote unquote scouting report on Jabari? Why were you so confident in having him number 1 on your board?
I think that when you look at what you need to succeed at the NBA level, right? In today's NBA, you need defense, you need shooting, you need size. And there were two guys at the top of the draft that provided all three of those skills immediately right out of the door. And that was Jabari Smith and Chet Holmgren. I think that's why a lot of, people in the draft community had those two guys at number 1 and number 2 respectively. However, I think with Chet Holmgren, ingrained in Chet is a level of inherent risk, right? Somebody that's that big with the frame that he has, his size, right? Is he going to fill out at the NBA level? And will he truly blossom into the size of what you need an NBA 5 to be? Or is his strength, is his physicality side of his game going to be an issue in years to come? So there was some inherent risk there. I still, throughout the whole process, I basically said, look, if each one of these top prospects hits their respective ceilings, Chet's going to be the by far best player in this draft, hands down, right? Crazy sky-high potentials, crazy sky-high ceiling, but there's that level of you got to balance the risk versus the reward factor there, right? And I think Jabari, in a way, is kind of both the safest pick, but also simultaneously has a really high ceiling of his own because of the fact that he's a 6'10" guy who is, at the time, I thought he was going to impact the game defensively in a positive manner. After Summer League, I have a newfound appreciation for how I think Jabari will be able to impact games, and I think we should start talking about him in the same light as a Chet Holmgren, somebody who's going to be kind of a defensive anchor who can transform your defense almost as a one-man unit. The way that he's going to impact NBA defenses with his size, with his length, with his IQ on that side of the basketball. And so it's that coupled with just the size. You can't teach height, right? He's got the physicals, he's got the measurables. And then you add in the shooting, right? This was a guy who shot 42% in college. That shooting, even though it didn't translate in Summer League, and a lot of people were suddenly like, bust alert with Jabari. I'm like, okay, look, we see people we see NBA players, the best of the best in the world go through stretches of 5, 10, 15, 20 game shooting slumps, right? We see it happen. Is it unfortunate that it happened during the chance for Jabari to kind of showcase himself and prove why he maybe should have been the number 1 overall pick in Summer League? Absolutely. Is it a long-term worry or concern? Absolutely not, right? There's nothing mechanically wrong with his jumper. Everything looks smooth. Everything looks so polished. And we even saw him in college, right? He was hitting deep threes in college. So I don't think the NBA range is something that has suddenly messed with his head. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Maybe he was adjusting to the pace of the game a little bit or overthinking some of the reps that he was getting offensively in Summer League. But the shooting is one of the last things that I'm worried about. And he flashed so much more than that in Summer League. Things that we weren't exactly, projecting that he'd be able to do right away at the NBA level. And I think that's what has me incredibly excited. Some of the things that we saw out of him offensively in Summer League, as well as the defensive side.
I would agree. And there's really, so you hit on both of them in different ways. There's 2 points that really stand out to me specifically about why Jabari Smith's going to be a good fit with the Rockets. Apart from just that, given Jabari Smith's skill set and his size, as you pointed out, that combination, he could be a fit on any NBA team, right? Like he was the one guy near the top where you could say any of the teams across the league could use a Jabari Smith. But the 2 things that stand out, the first, I'm glad you wanted to talk about the defense more so than the offense, because with a young team like the Rockets, right, you guys can go up and down the court, score a whole ton of points, but defense is always one of those things that's going to come last to young teams because you're bringing in a lot of guys, first and second year players who need to learn how to play defense and read the game at the NBA level. And oh, by the way, they also have to learn how to interact and play with new teammates, right? Like these top defensive teams in the league that we see, take the 2 that were just in the NBA Finals, for example, they've been playing with each other for years and years and years. And those bonds, those relationships, that chemistry is really a big boon of why their defenses are so successful. So you bring in a guy like Jabari Smith, who is an incredibly versatile defender. He showed not only his length, but also his foot speed, his anticipation, his competitiveness on that side of the ball as well. He wants to play defense. How important do you think it was for the Rockets to go into the draft with the 3rd pick saying, look, regardless of what this guy may or may not be in the offensive side of the ball, we got to bring in somebody who can play defense and really start to set the tone and build a culture for this young Rockets team? How important do you think that was?
Honestly, Nathan, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't think that was necessarily like a goal or a vision, at least not with the 3rd overall pick. I do think that the Rockets were very much targeting and wanted Tari Eason with the 17th pick. And I know we're going to talk about him.
We're going to get to him. Don't worry.
Yeah, a little bit further down the line. So, but with the 3rd overall pick, that was a you can't lose situation, right? Because it was a top 3 draft. You're going to take whoever's left at pick number 3, right? That's the perfect spot to be in, because even if whoever drops number 3, right? Whether it was Chet, whether Paolo wound up there, it wound up being Jabari, doesn't matter, because that's the guy you take. And if he doesn't pan out, guess what? You don't get labeled, a dumpster fire organization for taking the wrong guy number 1 overall, or taking the wrong guy number 2, and having a guy slip past you to number 3 and then outplay the guys who went ahead of him in the draft. At number 3 in a 3-player draft, you take whoever's there and you just hope he works out for your organization. So I think that's kind of the mentality, I guess, towards Jabari, in the sense it wasn't so much, oh, we need to add a defensive guy. It's all right, we're going to add a really, really talented player at the top of the draft. And whether it's Jabari, Banchero, or Chet, it doesn't matter. We're going to be ecstatic about whoever we add to this group. Hindsight is 2020, but grabbing a guy like Jabari Smith at number 3 overall, right? It does kind of help accelerate the rebuilding side, or at least the defensive side of the rebuild for the Rockets, because you've got all these young guys, right? You help start to instill that new defensive identity on that side of the basketball. So again, I don't think it was necessarily an objective of the organization to get a defense first type player at the top of the draft, but the way that it worked out and just how much defensive potential Jabari flashed in Summer League, I think a big part of it was the position that he played in Summer League was different, and his role was different in Summer League than it was at Auburn, because at Auburn, their defensive scheme was largely, all right, we've got, 7-footer Walker Kessler behind us, funnel everything to Walker, and he's just going to, block everything at the rim. Whereas in Summer League, the Rockets unfortunately, they weren't able to showcase Usman Garuba, and that's, story for another day as far as the Rockets are concerned. But what that effectively did is Jabari was maybe not necessarily playing out of position, but he was playing the 5 for the Rockets. And so defensively, he was, stationed behind everything. He was able to survey everything. He was communicating. He was quarterbacking that Rockets defense and from the post area, and still, effectively going out, guarding pick and roll coverages, guarding on switches, all types of different, defensive looks that we got out of him. But because of where he was stationed on the floor, and because he didn't have another big that he was effectively funneling guys to, we got a really, really good glimpse at all the different ways that Jabari is going to be able to impact a game defensively, be it on the ball, be it in pick and roll coverage, be it isolation, be it, as a weak side shot blocking presence, all these different areas that he is, really going to be able to put his stamp on the game on that side of the floor.
We'll talk about lineup construction a little later on, but you did bring up an interesting nugget about how they use Jabari at Summer League. Do you foresee them testing out small ball 5, quote unquote, with Jabari Smith playing that center position sooner rather than later? Or do you think that's something that maybe, they're going to run through their options at that spot, and then eventually, like January, February, March, that might be something they start to tinker with?
No, absolutely. I think that's going to be something we see from like day one.
Really? Okay.
The expectation that I have for the 5 spot for the Rockets this season is going to be, Alperen Sengun is going to be your starter. Yep. No Christian Wood in Houston anymore. No questions about who the starting center spot belongs to, at least in the, not so distant future. So Alp is going to start, and he's going to get anywhere from 28 to 30, 32 minutes a night. And that leaves you about anywhere from 16 to 20 minutes to tinker with in the backup 5 spot. Sure. And I think a strong dosage of those minutes are going to go to Usman Garuba, so they can actually hopefully see what they have with him as as a backup big in today's NBA, and really see if there's something there, or if they need to kind of abandon the hope that he's going to be able to translate at the NBA level. And then I'd assume probably about anywhere from 10 or so minutes. So Usman Garuba getting about 10 to 12 minutes. And then the remainder of those minutes at the 5 spot are going to be some version of Jabari Smith Jr. slotting over to the 5 spot, and the Rockets playing small, playing 5 out, playing small. But you can't even say that they're playing small, because Jabari still gives you size. He still gives you the ability to defend the interior. And I think that's going to be a mismatch nightmare for opposing teams, trying to figure out how they can gain an offensive advantage while also still trying to slow down the Rockets offensively, who are going to be able to space things 5 out and really open up the floor with Jabari at the 5.
So the other piece to this is obviously the shooting ability, the versatility as a shot maker, which we don't have to talk about the efficiency or deficiency, I should say, that was his Summer League shooting splits. But it's really interesting when you talk about before the draft, everybody was saying Jabari Smith needs to play alongside one or two other creators, right? Because that's not going to be something that he does at a high level immediately once he walks into the NBA. You throw him in a lineup, obviously Jalen Green's going to get a lot more run as he continues to grow as a pick and roll guy, as somebody who you want primarily handling the ball. You still have Kevin Porter Jr. in the mix. You have a number of guards, Josh Christopher coming off the bench, Ty Washington. There's plenty of guys there to handle the ball and make something happen with it, right? But for Jalen Green in particular, for him to take a step as a playmaker, isn't it going to be really fun to watch him work not only just with Alperen Sengun in the pick and roll game, having him do some fun stuff out of the short roll and then redirect the ball because Jalen's a really good cutter towards the basket too. But now you add the pick and pop dimension as well with Jabari Smith. And now you're talking about putting a bunch of different options for Jalen to go to in the same lineup on the floor for what you would assume to be the lion's share of his minutes. How much fun do you think some of that pick and roll or pick and pop chemistry is going to be with those two bigs?
I mean, it's gonna be a ton of fun. Like, that's kind of like just thinking about the like you said, right? And I think that's the key way to look at it, right? It's just the number of weapons that are going to be on the floor for the Rockets offensively. Jabari is going to, at the same time, right? You look at what the skill set that Christian Wood in a vacuum hypothetically provided, and Jabari gives you a lot of that same skill set offensively. He's a stretch big, right? He's supposed to be able to shoot the ball well from behind the 3-point line.
Yep.
But Christian Wood had deficiencies in his offensive game where he would, isolate too much or, want to bring the ball up in transition and just, not pass it to anybody else within the offense. And you're not going to get those same moments out of Jabari, who's an incredibly unselfish player, showcased that in Summer League, consistently made the right passes, the right decisions offensively, and very much stuck to the role that the coaching staff wanted him to play, which was the primary screen setter, pick and pop threat. He had a few moments where he actually rolled to the basket as a big, although those were few and far between.
Sure.
So the idea of a Rockets offense centered on primary ball handlers in Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green operating either out of the pick and roll with Alperen Sengun and then having him be the secondary facilitator within the offense and being able to make that read out of the short roll or, out of the middle of the floor, kicking it out to a guy like Jabari Smith and having him just feasting from behind the 3-point line. I'd imagine that they're really going to look to use his range to stretch defenses out. So I don't imagine they're going to use him in the corners quite too often. I think they're going to use him a lot out of the slot and probably top of the key to really pull the defense further out away from the paint to open up those driving lanes for Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. And then, just as a pick and pop threat, right? Getting him involved directly in the action. I do think one area that he showcased a little bit, right, was the ability to finish at the rim using his length in Summer League. And even though he doesn't have, an incredible ability to put the ball on the floor and, cross somebody up and snatch somebody's ankles and then get to the rim and finish that way, he's got a pretty effective, dribble drive game to where if he gets, just enough of a step past his defender, he's got the bigger upper body, he's got the size, the length, gets one or two dribbles going, and then he can just elevate once he's a few feet away from the basket and just rise up over the defense. And he did that both in the half court and in transition. So I do think as he grows his offensive game, if he can become a serviceable pick and roll big, as far as a rim running big is concerned, as well as incorporating the pick and pop side of the game, he's going to be a nightmare to defend. And then, because then how do you defend Jalen Green and that in a pick and roll in the half court? It's damn near impossible.
Exactly. And that's really what we're talking about with the Rockets. With all of these interesting young picks that they're making, there's also so many different options building towards the future. They'll have a lot of different ways that head coach Stephen Silas can continue to experiment with this lineup. And speaking of experiments, their second first round pick, we saw the Tari Eason experience, whatever word you want to use with it. It was fucking awesome, man.
The word you're looking for, Nathan, is revelation. That's the word you want. It was the Tari Eason revelation, because that was a spiritual experience watching Tari Eason dominate the way that he did in Summer League.
I came away, off the top of my head, I don't really have a short list of 3 to 5 players of who impressed me most at Summer League, but without a doubt, he would be on that short list. I came away incredibly impressed with him. And I had him as a top 20 player all year, right? I thought where the Rockets got him at the time of the draft was great value and where to get him. That's where I thought he should have went, sort of like that mid first round range. you watch him at Summer League and it's like, oh my God, like this guy could actually provide top 10 value from where you got him at 17. He was that impressive on both sides of the ball. I'm curious, Jackson, to talk about not only what you saw at Summer League and how impressed you are with him moving forward for the Rockets, but also same with Jabari Smith. What was your scouting report on Tari before the draft, and where were you kind of at on him?
You know, I think we use the term defends 1 through 5 so loosely in NBA circles. We throw
also a pet peeve of mine. Yep.
We throw that term around all the time, right? We use it like we drink water or breathe air. And frankly, I think it's kind of overused at this point. There's truly very few players in the NBA who can actually guard 1 through 5. I think Tari is one of those players. I think he has the foot speed, the lateral quickness, the defensive IQ, the spatial awareness, all of that to be able to defend smaller, quicker, faster players. And then he's also got the physicals, the size, the wingspan, the length, the height, and the strength to defend bigger guys. So genuinely, I think using that term, Tari Eason can defend 1 through 5 is true. And it's not a hyperbole. It's going to be fact. You're going to see that play out a lot at the NBA level where he's going to shut down some guards and he's going to shut down some big men. And we saw that take place in Summer League, right? Where the Rockets used a scheme where they switched a lot of their actions defensively, and Tari had some reps where he was guarding out on the perimeter. He had reps where he was guarding on the interior, and he looked comfortable doing it both ways. To me, the thing for him is his anticipation defensively. He just has such great defensive instincts. Like, there's just guys who can just read things, and it's almost like they're seeing them before they happen, sometimes. And to me, a good sign of that is a guy who's a great rebounder, he's not right. Tari Eason's not like towering over everybody out there, absorbing rebounds because he's the biggest guy on the floor. He is out hustling and out working and out reading other guys for these rebounds, be it defensively and offensively. And so that level of just, again, floor awareness, the ability to read how a ball is getting, going to bounce off the rim, right? We can go all the way back to right, The Last Dance, when Dennis Rodman's talking about getting rebounds and he's like this, and he's doing the whole thing, talking about which way it's going. I mean, I'm just picturing like the Zach Galifianakis gif from Hangover, where Tari's like calculating like where the rebounds are going to go, because he finishes the #1 rebounder in Summer League. If you get rid of it was Taco Fall and one other guy who played like 2 games, less than 20 minutes a night. So if you 86 those 2 guys out of the counting stats for Summer League, Tari Eason led all rebounders at 10.6 per game, looked incredible doing it. So I think a big part of that is the defensive side again. And that's crazy to think, is that both the 2 top draft picks for the Rockets, Jabari at number 3 and Tari at number 17, their offensive games are exciting. And I'm, very much looking forward to seeing how those translate at the NBA level, but I am more excited about what they bring defensively, both of those guys, to this Houston Rockets organization. Because again, it feels like overnight the Rockets have injected a lot of defense and a lot of defensive potential and versatility, and 2 guys who pride themselves on being top-notch quality defenders, which is going to kind of, inspire the other guys on the roster to want to follow suit, right? Because nobody wants to be the one guy dragging ass on defense. Nobody wants to be the guy that the coach is calling out. Nobody wants to be that guy. And so now you've got a guy in Jabari who's going to be an incredibly vocal leader in that Rockets locker room right away, and a guy who takes pride in defense. And Jalen Green has constantly spoken about defense throughout his pre-draft process, throughout his rookie year with the Rockets.
He's going to be good, by the way, on defense. We're talking about like the Rockets could have 3+ defenders in their starting lineup in time. With Jabari and Tari, we expect them to get there sooner rather than later. And then Jalen, as he continues to fill out his body, gets stronger. Like, he's going to get in that same conversation as well. So yeah, the defensive identity the Rockets can now start to build with is pretty freaking exciting. And it's a little crazy. I want to talk more about Tari Eason than I do the number 3 overall pick in Jabari Smith, but it's the one thing that I could really take away from Summer League that stood out to me. And I was like, this is one of those things that I talked about before the draft that could make Tari a different player on the defensive side of the ball. Was you talked about his anticipation and how he reads the floor and how he can just make plays because he sees things quicker than others do. Yes, he does. At times that was a bad thing though at LSU, because he was such a gambling man, right? He took so many chances, and some of those chances he took left me just yelling at my screen at times. I'm like, just sit down, defend this guy. And more often than not, you're going to not only stop him, but you can use your quick hands in that stance, and you can probably poke the ball away and still get running on transition. we saw a disciplined Tari Eason on defense in summer league. That has me excited. So technically a different profile a little bit than what he showed at college. Did that surprise you at all? Did that get you even more jazzed up about what we're going to see in the regular season? Like, what was your opinion on that?
I think there's a level, right, of in summer league. I think especially with Tari, right, he was maybe a little too aggressive in that first game, both offensively and some of the gambles that he took defensively.
Yep.
And then I think he kind of like took a step back, took a breath, right, and was
reined it in.
Yeah, he reined it in, and that was exciting, right, because it's like. And this has been my comp for Tari Eason because it feels so similar watching these two guys play. He's like a slightly more in-control Corey Brewer. The physicals are not the same, but just thinking about how Corey Brewer played the game of basketball, it's like Corey Brewer was constantly on like 110. Like that's just how he was going. It's like Tari like reined it into like 90 or 95 to where he's still got, he's still, out hustling everybody, out running everybody, out working everybody on the floor. But reined it in just enough to kind of not be as reckless with things offensively or defensively. The number one issue that I see for him, and this is the case for pretty much every rookie that comes in, but especially for guys who are going to be that aggressive on the defensive side, is going to be the foul trouble, right? He's going to he racked up a ton of fouls in summer league, and he's going to rack up a ton of fouls as a rookie. Thankfully, he's not going to be in a position, I don't think, to be warranted, starters minutes right out of the gate. So I don't think foul trouble is going to like prevent him from closing out games or being available when the coaching staff would want to inject him into the lineup. So, but again, that's going to be the area that he's going to have to learn how to balance being aggressive, using his hands, trying to force steals, trying to force turnovers and create those opportunities defensively with balancing the fact that he needs to be in the game just for his sheer presence for what he provides as a defender. Rafael Stone called him a defensive playmaker. And I think that is the most adept breakdown of what Tari provides to you, because he makes plays defensively, which then turn into offensive opportunities.
So what I absolutely love when these lottery teams do this is they not only identify the top talents that they can use their draft picks on, but they also identify where some of these talents can cross over and ultimately impact deficiencies in the team's game overall. So the Houston Rockets last year, per synergy, they were 30th in transition scoring. They were 25th in scoring out of the pick and roll, 21st in scoring from the roll man. They were poor on runners, and obviously they could stand to improve. They're finishing around the basket. What's excellent about where they went with Jabari Smith, with Tari Eason, and you can make an argument, one of those last points with Ty Washington at 29, they not only brought in some of the best talent, but they also brought in talent who in time can help address all of those weaknesses. Isn't that a really cool thing to say about a team who's drafting that high, to really look at it and be able to make decisions, some of it based on obviously how these guys felt to them, but be able to make the decisions to really build this team and address weaknesses with the current group of guys they have. And because there's so many young guys, you would figure that this is the core they are going to look to build around the most for the next 2 to 3 years, see what they have, and then they'll make moves as they need to. But the fact that they're really able to invest in making the guys they have right now better with some of these picks, I think that's a really cool thing to see. What about you?
No, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there, Nathan. The way that it worked out, right, and it doesn't always work out this way, is they not only got the best player, I think, at every possible avenue there in the first round, they also got the best possible fit at every pick. And I think that is something that, just the stars were aligned to where every single pick made the most sense for Houston, both from a fit perspective and from a talent perspective. To me, even though the idea at times was tantalizing to think about, a Paolo Banchero, Jalen Green tandem offensive duo and the ceiling that duo could potentially reach offensively, there were a ton of question marks about what that would mean for Alperen Şengün's future in Houston, what that would mean for how you have to build and construct a roster around those two guys, because, Paolo right now at least doesn't necessarily flash the same defensive prowess that the other couple top prospects did. And so then you have to consider, okay, well, do you have to find like a defensive-minded center to place alongside Paolo to really maximize your defense to be able to achieve at the highest level? Like these are questions that you have to answer, much further down the timeline of rebuilding, 2, 3, 5 years down down the line as you're really starting to build and mold that roster into what is hopefully a playoff contender and then subsequently a championship contender. But out of the gate, the Rockets don't have to, address any of those questions because the fit is so seamless with all the guys that they brought in. Jabari Smith Jr. is almost the exact carbon copy exact guy that you would want to place next to an Alperen Şengün in an NBA system, because he answers almost every single deficiency in Alperen Şengün's game. And the way that they complement each other is out of this world. Like, he was like I did a recent show where I asked a guest of mine and we kind of discussed this. Who benefited the most from the addition of Jabari Smith Jr. to this Rockets roster? Was it Jalen Green, KPJ, or Alperen Şengün? And the runaway answer for both myself and him, as well as all the commenters, all the listeners, was it has to be Alperen Şengün. He's the guy that his future is now kind of solidified, at least for the time being. Yep. He's the center. Moving forward, the Rockets are ready to invest in him and Jabari as the front court of the future for this Rockets organization. And I'm honestly maybe even more excited to see how those two guys play off of each other a little bit than I am about how Jalen and Jabari are going to play off of each other, just because I think the potential for Alp to have yet another outlet offensively, depending on how much of the offense runs through Alp this next season, is going to be potentially transcendent, right? Steven Silas came to Houston as this offensive guru. At the time, he had the best offense in NBA history with the Mavericks, with Luka Doncic in a very heliocentric offense, but it had some wrinkles. It had a lot of fun stuff going on in it, things that he hasn't really been able to achieve with this Rockets roster yet in his couple seasons here. So this is a big year for Steven Silas, and now that he's got the talent and all these weapons offensively, I'm really excited to see what he unleashes.
I agree 100% about the Alperen Şengün piece, and the reason why I agree, maybe it's because I was really high on Şengün coming out of that draft as well. I mean, I would have sat there. I talked about when I was doing different mock draft exercises before 2021, I was saying I would have taken Şengün as high as number 6, right? If I were the Thunder, and they ended up making a deal with the Thunder to ultimately get Alperen Şengün. So it's funny how that worked out. But
look, there is no shorter look. It's crazy that it's happened once. It's even crazier that it's happened twice, where the OKC Thunder and Sam Presti have just gift wrapped the Houston Rockets a future All-Star. So shout out to the Thunder organization. Hats off to Sam Presti for always looking out for his good friends down here in Houston.
So we've kind of danced around options that the Rockets have in their starting lineup. And I wanted to talk about what a starting lineup could look like for fans of the team. I did that with the Magic, with Andrew Saul from Combos Core last podcast. And I think that was more of a discussion to have with him, because I don't think there was as much cemented in stone with that starting lineup as with Houston. Like Houston, I think Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Alperen Şengün. We can name 4 out of 5 starters, right?
Yeah,
the 3 spots.
Those are your 4. That's 80% of the way done. So.
Right. So it's really 1 spot, right? It's that 3 spots. So there's obviously Jae'Sean Tate is back. Eric Gordon's still there as the vet. Tari Eason now gets introduced into the mix. Like Jackson, this is why it's great to be able to ask you the question of who you think versus who you think should start versus what you think is actually going to happen, because I can sit here from where I'm sitting, right? And I'm not the head coach. I don't have to deal with personalities in the locker room or try and make a vet or two happy with giving them a certain role within the lineup. I don't have to worry about any of that. I can just watch the film and I can try and judge for myself who I think should be that starting 3. And for my money, it's crazy that I'm saying this, or maybe not so crazy after watching Summer League. I think it should be Tari's job. I really think it should be Tari's job. Now, whether that actually happens, because he's a rookie, he's going to have to earn that role, that remains to be seen. But if I asked you both of those questions, what do you think should happen versus what do you think is actually going to happen, what's that answer for that 3 spot?
So what I think should happen is I think it should be Jae'Sean Tate.
Okay.
And I have to go completely right. I try my best to balance between eye test and between what the advanced stats say. And on this note, none of the advanced stats support Jae'Sean Tate as the 5th starter, because unfortunately for Jae'Sean Tate, the last 2 seasons, he's averaged out to about, I think, 31% shooting for his NBA career. He provides you so much on the floor, versatility offensively. He's a very elite defender. maybe lacking a little bit in the size department, but makes up for that just because he's a big, strong guy. Even though he's 6'4", he can guard bigger players. He's effective. And the 3 is his natural position, right? On the wing. Last year, he played an undersized 4 next to Christian Wood. There were a lot of deficiencies to what the Rockets were trying to do last year, but the hang-up is the 3-ball. There are reports that suggest Jae'Sean Tate has a revamped 3-ball that he's really been killing it this summer. If Jae'Sean Tate magically shows up to training camp shooting 35% or higher from 3, he should be the de facto starter, because that is at least a respectable enough 3-point percentage to get done what the Rockets want to do offensively while maintaining a new, different, kind of staunch defensive identity on that side of the basketball, being able to throw JT at the toughest task offensively or defensively, if you will, for the team on a nightly basis. Have him check the opposing best player, throw Jabari on the next best player, throw KPJ, who's also improved his defense, right? You have all those different opportunities defensively.
I love Jae'Sean Tate, by the way. That's my answer was no slander towards that. I love watching Jae'Sean Tate play. And it's really interesting how there were a number of times you flip on the film from last year where other guys couldn't get it going, but he would make the hustle play, or he'd post up at the right angle, or he'd get the offensive rebound. He would make things happen for that Rockets team on the offensive side of the ball, and then everything he talked about defensively. So I love Jae'Sean Tate. I'm not mad at that, by the way. I love a big Tate fan.
And I think you also got to look at some of the, just kind of reading some of the tea leaves here. Jae'Sean Tate was injected into the Rockets starting lineup 10 games into Steven Silas's career as a head coach here in Houston, in the midst, right after the James Harden, saga ended here in Houston, and hasn't left the starting lineup since. If Jae'Sean Tate is playing, he's been a starter. So you got to try and look at it from that perspective. Who I think is ultimately going to start, if he's still a Rocket, will be Eric Gordon. Okay. And I think that for a variety of reasons, I think the Rockets, if EG is still here in Houston, they still want to showcase him a little bit. They still want to show, hey, he's, very much still a guy that can impact winning. Hopefully he goes out and still produces at the level that he's been producing this whole past year, and the Rockets can maybe dangle him for a future first-round draft pick. I don't expect him to get a ton of minutes. Like, he's not going to get 30 plus a night, and he's not going to play back-to-backs, and he's going to, rest some games here and there, but he'll be the starter that plays, 20, 25 minutes a night, primarily alongside Jalen and KPJ, to do exactly what we talked about doing earlier. What Jabari is going to do so well is space the floor, right? Because ultimately, this Rockets organization and Steven Silas, they owe it to KPJ and Jalen Green to give them the best possible tools to succeed this next season, to really try and showcase what that duo can be. And last year, they had to juggle a lot. They had to juggle Christian Wood. They had to juggle the kind of the transition and Jalen Green's rookie year and Kevin Porter Jr. adjusting to the point guard role. There is no more juggling this next season. This next season, it's, okay, how good can this group of guys be, right? And they've got rookies that are very much, I don't want to say that they're not dynamic, because that's not the right way to phrase it and it has a negative connotation, but they don't have a rookie like Jalen Green who can do so many different things offensively, where you've got to kind of see where his strengths and weaknesses can be, and, practice with him on the ball, off the ball, right? Like, letting him learn and adjust to the speed of the NBA game offensively. The guys they added offensively, Jabari, Tari, they're very much going to fit into their roles offensively. Spot up and shoot, threes offensively, get out and transition, play, hard-nosed, tough defense. Those guys can fit into their roles almost seamlessly coming into this team. Whereas with Jalen, you had to juggle quite a bit more to really see what you got with rookie Jalen Green. So I think it's going to be Eric Gordon, because he's the guy that impacts winning at the highest level on this Rockets roster. You could still probably make the argument Eric Gordon's the best player on this Rockets roster. Jalen Green has the most potential. He's the most talented player. Absolutely. KPJ, sky-high potential as well. Same for Jabari, right? Tons of potential on this Rockets roster. But EG is still the most polished player. He's the veteran. He's arguably still maybe the team's best defender. Although Jabari, I think, is going to come for that title very, very quickly. The way that he impacts defense as a whole, not just on a one-on-one type of, I'm going to, lock you down, which Eric Gordon can still very much do at this stage in his career when he's, puts his mind towards it. So putting a guy like that in the Rockets starting lineup unlocks so much more for the other guys, because he doesn't need the basketball to impact the game. You space him 5 feet behind the three-point line and let him just sit there, and he'll also bail them out of some possessions offensively. So that gives the Rockets, right? It's just EG's out there babysitting the other 4 young guys, a rookie, 2 second-year players, and then effectively a guy who as far as accumulative NBA games played, is I think not even is basically in his junior year in KPJ. So you've got EG out there babysitting those guys, and I think that's what's going to happen.
I would agree.
I'd prefer to see Jayshawn Tate be in that starting lineup. And as impressed as I am with Tari Eason, I cannot for the life of me see this Rockets organization starting 2 rookies out of the gate when they have other options at that 3 spot. If Tari was their best option at the 3 spot, I'd say it's going to be Tari, but they have other options that provide a bit more of that veteran stability. And even Jayshawn Tate, he's going into his 3rd year in the NBA, and he's already an older kind of young player, even though he's going into his 3rd year. He's, 26 years old now. He's played overseas. He has that level of like veteran respect and veteran mentality about him. The Rockets organization consider him a veteran. When they talk about classifying their young guys versus their vets, they treat Jayshawn Tate as a vet, right? He has that respect and he has that trust from the coaching staff, and his voice carries in that Rockets locker room. So either one of those guys makes sense to have at least one veteran presence in the starting lineup.
So I mentioned in the DMs that I was going to talk with you about ranking some of their young core, which I know the whole team is young. I get it. Like that's a different meaning for other teams around the league. But if we're talking under 25 guys and we're trying to rank the top 5 players for the Rockets' importance of the franchise moving forward in that category, there's obviously a number of names we could throw in there. I think Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, Usman Garuba, Daisha Nix, they're all fun names to talk about. But I think, to me, the 5 players of most importance will obviously be Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Kevin Porter Jr., and Alperen Şengün. And ironically enough, that would be my ranking of those players moving forward at this point. So if I were to ask you to do the same with those 5 names, given how well you cover the team, how much you know about the Rockets, how would you categorize those players and rank them moving forward?
Can you give me your 5 one more time?
Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Kevin Porter Jr., and then Alperen Şengün.
I would go Jalen Green number 1.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to go Kevin Porter Jr. number 2.
I love it. First of all, I'm still a big Kevin Porter Jr. guy, so I love it. Why would you go him at number 2 over Jabari Smith?
Because I think with KPJ, you can make an argument that KPJ's ceiling is even higher than Jalen Green's.
You can.
And I think that from the flashes that we've seen out of him, if he realizes his potential alongside Jalen Green, if the Rockets hit on all these guys, we're going to be talking about a team that, as long as they have the money and they're willing to pay it, they're going to be a perennial championship contender 4 or 5 years down the line from now. Very much in the same boat that it feels like the Boston Celtics kind of are, as their young core has started to grow and coalesce together. Jason Tatum kind of, growing into his MVP caliber self. Jaylen Brown realizing his potential as, a second option and at times a first option for that Celtics team. So the Rockets could very much be in that same boat. And a lot of that is, I don't want to say it's necessarily riding on what happens with KPJ, but he's still kind of the wild card, right? Like, I feel like Jalen Green is on the trajectory to maximize his potential. Jabari Smith, same thing. Very high floor, very safe bet as a pick. KPJ is just in a completely different boat where it's just like, what does he ultimately become, right? Is he ultimately a sixth man at the NBA level? Is that what his true ceiling is? Is that his best role on a contending team? Or can he truly be, a number 1 or number 2 option as the floor general, the leader, the primary ball handler for a championship caliber organization? And this next season is going to be a really good glimpse into that, because we got a brief glimpse at it at the end of last season after the Rockets had shut down Christian Wood. Now, you take this with a grain of salt because it was the final 7 games of the season, but KPJ basically averaged, 28, 7, and 7 over the final 7 or so games and looked absolutely like in the flow of the offense doing it. Didn't look bad, didn't look like he was just, out there, putting up empty stats. Like, the Rockets were pretty competitive over those.
At the end of the year, that backcourt looked like it could be one of the best in the NBA for sure.
Exactly. And so I think that's why KPJ has to be up there. And I would almost venture to say put him at number 1 on the list, but I do still think Jalen Green is the future number 1 option, the future franchise cornerstone, or not even future. He is the franchise cornerstone now of the Rockets. He's the face of the team moving forward. So he has to be number 1. KPJ has to be number 2. And for a lot of the same reasons as KPJ, you got to put Alperen Şengün at number 3 on that list, because there are question marks about what you can achieve with Alp as your 5, right? He's a bit undersized at the 5. It just, 6'9", 6'10". Does he have another growth spurt left in him? He's still young. He just turned 20 years old the other day, like just recently. So had a birthday. I think it was less than a week ago, actually, as we're recording this podcast. So, he's effectively younger than a lot of the guys that were picked at the top of the draft in this year's draft. So, what version of Alperen Şengün, what can he truly become as an NBA player, right? Is he going to be an offensive hub? Is he going to be a future all-star? Is he going to be a liability defensively to where you can't ever truly make up enough ground on the defensive side despite what he gives you on the offensive end? Can he iron out some of the turnovers in his game? Can he kind of rein it in like we talked about Tari Eason doing and focus on making the right good reads offensively rather than trying to come up with a highlight reel play every time he touches the basketball, which are still fun. It's still incredibly exciting to watch, but there's also a lot of errors that come from that. Sure. Both by just, again, you talked about chemistry early on, right? There's a lot of chemistry issues that at times Alp just didn't get enough reps with his teammates. So sometimes they weren't even expecting these wild, like behind the back passes, 5-hole passes, through opposing defenders' legs, like all these, insane passes that we saw out of him. But he's got incredible potential. And so as far as what this means for the organization, I think you can safely look at Jalen, and he's like a lock for the 2 spot for the foreseeable future, right? Yep. Jabari, he's a lock to be your 4 for, however long you can hold on to him. And Tari Eason is a wing that is going to be starter caliber at some point in his career, right? And you can make the argument that talent-wise, he's able to start right now out of the gate. Yeah. So I think those 3 positions, the Rockets have some rocks, some solid picks that are going to be here for a long time. The question mark positions kind of become KPJ's future at point and whether or not Alperen Şengün is the future and the answer at the 5 spot. And so I think that's why those guys have to be 2 and 3 respectively on that list. And then I'd go Jabari and Tari to round out the list at 4 and 5.
So it's really, it's the fact that those question marks exist. Why I flip-flopped essentially those 2 groups of players, but I will not argue with you about having KPJ and Şengün 2 and 3. I'm glad that we did this podcast because any positive KPJ and Şengün talk, it brightens my day, right? This is a team that I can't call myself a Rockets fan, but I already know I'm going to be watching plenty of Rockets basketball this upcoming season. They're one of my favorite young teams that I'm going to be watching moving forward. So this was a pleasure of a podcast, Jackson. You knocked it out of the park. It was everything I could have hoped for and more. You're a true professional in the space. So thank you so much for hopping on and talking some Rockets basketball. For my audience, please let them know where they can find you and everything that you're doing in the space.
Nathan, an absolute pleasure to be on the show. I can't wait. We're going to have you at some point next season to come on Locked on Rockets just to kind of reflect on these young guys and kind of see what they're doing at the NBA level. And then to also kind of look at the next, draft batch of young guys, because look, I said at the top, the Rockets aren't going to do a lot of winning this season, but which means they're going to be very much in play for the Wemby sweepstakes in next year's draft, maybe the runner-up sweepstakes in Scoot Henderson. And so we're definitely going to have you come by to talk about some of those guys next season. But for all your listeners, they can track me down on Twitter, on the Bird app, at JT Gatlin. That's where I yell about all the things that I do. I host Locked on Rockets 5 days a week. It's the only 5-day-a-week podcast covering the Houston Rockets. Right now, we're in off-season mode, so we're not doing 5 days a week. But once we get back to training camp and stuff, we'll be back at 5 days a week going strong. Yep. I also host Locked on NBA Mondays. I host another Rockets podcast called State of the Rockets. And then I'm also the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com, a Houston-based Rockets blog.
That's an impressive resume, my friend. Like I said, you do great work in the space. So I truly do appreciate you coming. Yeah, anytime you want me, man, just let me know, shoot me a message. But an even bigger thanks is in order to everybody who does listen to the Draft Deeper podcast, those who support myself, those who support everybody in No Ceilings. We truly appreciate you out there as fans. If you aren't subscribed to the show already, please make sure you go do so. Wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, make sure you're following me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you're following the No Ceilings Collective on Twitter at No Ceilings NBA, and that you're subscribed to the Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com, where I did a little bit of writing about Tari Eason this week. So if you missed that piece, definitely go check it out. I'm sure you're going to love it. It's a whole piece where I basically admitted what I've been wrong about in scouting over the last 6 years. So
I love it. Look, I've said it time and time again. It's a running joke on LOR. I say that my favorite meal to eat is crow. I love eating crow. I love when I'm wrong. Because when I'm wrong, it shows that I can double back and I can grow from a mistake. And so if you're willing to go out there and say, hey, I was wrong on Tari Eason about XYZ thing, I respect you even more for that, Nathan. So kudos.
Absolutely. And then if you are a Thunder supporter, a Thunder fan, or you just love reading about rebuilding projects, our own Tyler Rucker just published a piece today. I promise it's worth your read, Jackson. I promise it's worth your read. He called it the art of Presti, and he really broke down what Sam Presti has actually done for the Oklahoma City Thunder over the years. So definitely make sure you go check out that piece as well. It was wonderfully written. I do love when Tyler does a good deep dive on the No Ceiling site. So make sure you're checking out all the content. And once again, thank you all for listening to this episode, supporting the podcast. Until we meet again on this feed, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.